The morning sun beat down on the Coronado Beach training facility as Master Chief Sarah Chun adjusted her tactical vest for the third time. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 130 pounds, she looked almost comically small among the towering figures of Navy SEALs who surrounded her. The sound of waves crashing against the shore mixed with the distant barking of drill instructors, putting new recruits through their paces. Sarah had been dreading this moment for weeks. As the Navy's newest female combat instructor, she was about to face her biggest challenge yet. 300 and one of the most elite warriors in the world were gathered here today for an advanced tactical training exercise, and she would be leading the demonstration. The skeptical looks and whispered comments had started the moment she walked onto the base. "Are you sure about this, Chun?" Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez asked as he approached her position near the obstacle course. His weathered face showed genuine concern rather than doubt. Rodriguez had been her mentor since she transferred to the training command 6 months ago. These guys have been through hell and back. They're not exactly known for their patience with new teaching methods. Sarah nodded, though her stomach churned with nervous energy. She had spent years preparing for this opportunity. Growing up in a military family in San Diego, she had watched her father struggle with PTSD after multiple deployments. That experience had driven her to develop new training techniques focused on psychological resilience and adaptive thinking under extreme stress. "I know what I'm doing, sir," she replied, checking her equipment one final time. These methods have been tested in controlled environments. The data shows significant improvement in decision-making under pressure and reduced anxiety responses in combat situations. Rodriguez studied her for a moment. "The data is one thing, Chun. These men are another. They've been doing things their way for decades, and most of them have the combat experience to prove those methods work." Around them, the SEALs were gathering in loose formations, their conversations a low rumble of masculine voices. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, some curious, others openly skeptical. She had faced this before during her time as a military psychologist, but never on such a massive scale or with such high stakes. The training exercise had been months in the planning. Sarah's innovative approach to stress inoculation and tactical decision-making had caught the attention of Naval Special Warfare Command. Her techniques combined traditional physical training with cutting-edge psychological methods designed to enhance performance under extreme stress. The theory was sound, but theory and practice were often very different things in the military world. "Listen up," Rodriguez's voice boomed across the training area. "Today we're going to be working with Instructor Chun on some new tactical approaches. I want everyone to give her your full attention and participation." A ripple of murmurs went through the assembled SEALs. Sarah could hear fragments of conversation, most of it not particularly encouraging. Words like experimental and unproven drifted her way, along with a few less polite observations about her size and gender. Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the beach despite its lack of volume. "Good morning, gentlemen. I know many of you have questions about what we're doing here today. You've trained hard to get where you are, and you've proven yourselves in situations most people can't even imagine. I'm not here to tell you that everything you've learned is wrong." She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "But I am here to show you that there are ways to be even better. Ways to push your performance beyond what you thought was possible, even after everything you've already accomplished." Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, a 15-year veteran with multiple combat deployments, raised his hand. "Ma'am, with all due respect, most of us have been in situations where these theoretical approaches might not hold up. What makes you think you can teach us something we haven't already learned the hard way?" The question wasn't hostile, but it carried the weight of hard-earned experience. Sarah had expected this and had prepared carefully for the challenge it represented. "Chief Morrison, you're absolutely right that experience is the best teacher," she replied. "But experience alone can sometimes create blind spots. We develop patterns that work most of the time, but those same patterns can become limitations when we face truly unexpected situations." She gestured toward the obstacle course that had been set up for the demonstration. "Today's exercise is designed to put you in scenarios where your normal responses might not be enough, where you'll need to adapt not just physically, but psychologically, to overcome challenges that can't be solved through strength or traditional tactics alone." The obstacle course looked deceptively simple at first glance. There were walls to climb, ropes to traverse, and barriers to navigate. But Sarah had worked with the training staff to incorporate elements that would challenge more than just physical capabilities. Hidden within the course were psychological stressors, decision points that would force participants to choose between competing objectives, and scenarios designed to trigger specific emotional responses. The goal isn't to make you doubt what you know, Sarah continued. It's to expand what you're capable of, to give you tools that work in addition to everything you've already mastered. Petty Officer First Class David Kim, a quiet operator with a reputation for precision shooting, spoke up. What kind of tools are we talking about, ma'am? Sarah smiled, appreciating the direct question. Techniques for managing stress hormones in real time. Methods for maintaining clarity when adrenaline wants to narrow your focus. Ways to read situations and people that go beyond traditional tactical assessment. She walked toward the starting line of the obstacle course, her movement drawing the attention of all 301 SEALs. But rather than explain them, I'd like to demonstrate. I'll be running the course first, showing you the techniques in action. Then, you'll have the chance to try them yourselves. The silence that followed was telling. Sarah could see the mix of expressions among the assembled warriors. Some seemed intrigued by the prospect of learning something new. Others appeared skeptical that someone of her size and apparent lack of combat experience could show them anything useful. A few looked almost amused at the idea of this small woman attempting to navigate a course designed for elite operators. Chief Morrison stepped forward. Ma'am, no disrespect intended, but that course is set up for operators who've been through years of conditioning. Are you sure you want to attempt it in front of everyone? The concern in his voice was genuine, but Sarah knew that backing down now would end any credibility she might have with these men. She had trained extensively for this moment, both physically and mentally. More importantly, she had designed the course specifically to demonstrate principles that went beyond raw physical capability. I appreciate your concern, Chief, she replied. But part of what I want to show you today is that effectiveness isn't always about size or conventional strength. Sometimes it's about thinking differently about problems. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez checked his watch. Chun, are you ready to begin? Sarah nodded and moved to the starting position. The morning sun was climbing higher now, and she could feel sweat beginning to form under her tactical gear. Around her, the SEALs had formed a loose semicircle, giving her room to work while maintaining clear sight lines to observe her performance. The first obstacle was a 12-foot wall with minimal handholds. Traditional approach would be to use upper body strength to pull oneself up and over. Sarah had a different plan. She studied the wall for a moment, then moved to examine its base and sides. Most of the observers assumed she was looking for the best grip points, but she was actually implementing one of her key principles: complete situational awareness before action. Take your time, ma'am, someone called out, though the tone suggested impatience rather than encouragement. Sarah ignored the comment and continued her assessment. She located a small irregularity in the ground near the wall's base and positioned herself accordingly. Rather than attempting to muscle her way up the wall, she used a technique that combined momentum, leverage, and precise timing. Her approach looked almost effortless compared to the brute force method typically employed. As she cleared the wall, she could hear surprised murmurs from the watching SEALs. The technique she had used was unconventional but clearly effective. More importantly, it demonstrated one of her core principles: working with available resources rather than simply overpowering obstacles. The next challenge was a rope traverse over a muddy pit. Again, Sarah paused to assess before acting. She tested the rope's tension and studied the anchor points at both ends. Most participants would focus on speed and strength to minimize time exposed on the rope. Sarah chose a different approach, using a technique that distributed her weight more efficiently and allowed for greater stability during the crossing. Halfway across, she encountered the first of the psychological elements she had built into the course. A series of strobe lights began flashing, designed to create disorientation and trigger stress responses. She could see several of the watching SEALs tense up, recognizing the potential for this distraction to cause falls or mistakes. Instead of fighting the disorientation, Sarah implemented one of her stress management techniques. She controlled her breathing, used peripheral vision to maintain awareness, and focused on the kinesthetic feel of the rope rather than relying purely on visual cues. Her movement remained steady and controlled despite the artificial stress factor. Interesting approach, Chief Morrison commented to the operator standing next to him. She's not trying to power through the distraction. As Sarah completed the rope traverse, the course presented its next challenge, a series of barriers that required both physical navigation and tactical decision-making. Each barrier had multiple routes around or over it, but some routes were designed to be more difficult or time-consuming than others. The psychological element here was choice paralysis under pressure. Sarah demonstrated another of her techniques, rapid assessment and decisive action. Rather than spending precious time evaluating every possible option, she used a systematic approach to quickly identify the most viable route and commit fully to executing it. Her method prioritized good decisions made quickly over perfect decisions made slowly. The watching seals were beginning to pay closer attention now. What had started as polite observation was becoming genuine interest. Sarah's approaches weren't just unconventional. They were demonstrably effective and clearly based on solid principles that could be learned and applied. She's making it look easy, Petty Officer Kim observed. But those techniques aren't simple. There's real science behind what she's doing. The fourth obstacle in the course was perhaps the most challenging from a psychological standpoint. Participants had to navigate through a narrow tunnel while audio equipment played recordings of simulated combat sounds, explosions, gunfire, and shouted commands. The tunnel was long enough that claustrophobia became a factor, and the audio was designed to trigger fight-or-flight responses. Sarah paused at the tunnel entrance and visibly implemented one of her preparation techniques. She spent 30 seconds controlling her breathing and mentally rehearsing her approach. Several of the observers noticed that she wasn't just psyching herself up. She was following a specific protocol for managing stress hormones before entering a high-stress situation. As she entered the tunnel, the combat audio began immediately. The sounds were realistic enough that several of the watching seals instinctively reached for weapons that weren't there. Sarah's progress through the tunnel remained steady and methodical. She was clearly affected by the psychological pressure, but was managing it through techniques rather than simply enduring it. Emerging from the tunnel, Sarah faced the final obstacle, a complex climbing structure that required problem-solving under continued stress. The structure was designed so that the obvious routes were actually dead ends, forcing participants to reassess and adapt their approach multiple times. This obstacle demonstrated Sarah's final key principle, flexible thinking under pressure. Rather than becoming frustrated when initial approaches failed, she treated each setback as additional information to incorporate into her problem-solving process. Her movement remained purposeful and controlled even as she had to backtrack and try different routes. As Sarah completed the final obstacle, the training area fell silent except for the sound of waves in the distance. She had not only successfully navigated a course designed for elite operators, but had done so using methods that were clearly different from conventional approaches. More importantly, her techniques appeared to be teachable and applicable to real-world situations. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez checked his stopwatch. Outstanding time, Chun. And, more importantly, textbook demonstration of the principles you've been developing. The assembled SEALs began discussing what they had observed. The conversations were markedly different from the skeptical murmurs that had preceded the demonstration. These were professional warriors recognizing techniques that could enhance their own capabilities. Chief Morrison approached Sarah as she removed her helmet. "Ma'am." The noon sun blazed overhead as Sarah divided the 301 SEALs into smaller training groups. Each group would rotate through different stations, allowing for more personalized instruction and hands-on practice. The energy on the beach had shifted dramatically from the morning's skeptical atmosphere to something approaching enthusiastic curiosity. "All right, gentlemen," Sarah announced, her voice carrying easily across the training area. "We're going to break into groups of 25. Each group will spend 40 minutes at each station before rotating. The stations will focus on different aspects of what you observed during the demonstration." Chief Morrison found himself assigned to Sarah's direct instruction group for the first rotation. As the 25 SEALs gathered around her, she could see a mix of expressions ranging from genuine interest to polite skepticism. These were men accustomed to learning from instructors with extensive combat experience, and Sarah knew she needed to establish credibility quickly through practical demonstration rather than theoretical explanation. "Before we begin," Sarah said, "I want to address something directly. I know some of you are wondering how someone with my background can teach you anything about combat effectiveness. That's a fair question, and I want to be honest about my experience." The group fell silent, clearly interested in her response to the elephant in the room. "I've never been in combat," Sarah continued. "I've never had to make life-or-death decisions under enemy fire. But what I have done is study how people perform under extreme stress, and I've worked with athletes, surgeons, pilots, and, yes, warriors, to understand what separates peak performers from everyone else." She gestured toward the obstacle course they had just watched her complete. "The techniques you're going to learn today aren't military techniques. They're human performance techniques that happen to work extremely well in military applications. They're based on how your brain and body actually function under stress, not on how we think they should function." Petty Officer First Class David Kim raised his hand. "Ma'am, can you give us a specific example of how this translates to real situations?" Sarah nodded appreciatively. "Excellent question. Let's talk about target acquisition under stress. Traditional training focuses on sight picture, breathing control, and trigger discipline, all critical skills. But neuroscience research shows that under high stress, your visual field narrows significantly. You lose peripheral vision, and your brain starts filtering out information it considers non-essential." She had the group's full attention now. These were concepts they could relate to their actual experience. "The techniques I'll show you today include methods for maintaining broader visual awareness even when your stress response wants to narrow your focus. This means you'll be more likely to spot threats you weren't specifically looking for, or identify opportunities that your tunnel vision might miss." Chief Morrison leaned forward slightly. "That makes sense in theory, ma'am. But how do you train something like that?" "By understanding and working with your physiology instead of fighting against it," Sarah replied. "Your stress response isn't your enemy. It's a tool that can be managed and directed. Let me show you." She led the group to the first training station, which appeared to be a simple shooting range setup. But Sarah had made modifications that weren't immediately obvious. Hidden speakers could introduce sudden loud noises, lights could create unexpected visual distractions, and the targets themselves could move in unpredictable patterns. "We're going to start with a baseline," Sarah explained, handing each SEAL a modified training weapon loaded with marking rounds. "I want you to engage the targets using your standard techniques. Don't try to do anything different. Just shoot the way you normally would." The SEALs moved into position and began engaging the targets. Their accuracy was predictably high. These were elite marksmen who had spent years perfecting their shooting skills. Sarah observed carefully, noting not just their accuracy but their body positioning, breathing patterns, and reaction times. "Excellent shooting," she commented as they completed the first round. "Now I'm going to introduce some stress factors, and we'll see what happens to your performance." Without warning, Sarah activated the hidden speakers. Sudden explosions and gunfire erupted around the shooting positions. Several of the SEALs instinctively ducked or flinched, even though they knew they were in a training environment. Their shots, while still accurate, showed measurable degradation in precision. "Interesting response," Chief Morrison observed. "Even knowing it was coming, the body reacts." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "Your rational mind knows you're safe, but your autonomic nervous system doesn't distinguish between training and real threats. It responds to what it perceives, not what you think. This is why simply telling yourself to ignore distractions rarely works." She had the group reset and prepare for another round. "This time, I'm going to teach you a technique called stress inoculation breathing. It's not the same as traditional breathing control. Instead, it's a way to manage your autonomic nervous system's response to unexpected stressors." Sarah demonstrated the technique, which involved a specific pattern of breathing that activated the parasympathetic nervous system while maintaining alertness. It looked simple, but the timing and rhythm were crucial for effectiveness. "The key is to start the technique before you need it," she explained. "You can't wait until you're already flooded with adrenaline. It has to be integrated into your preparation routine." The SEALs practiced the breathing technique for several minutes, with Sarah providing individual corrections and guidance. Some picked it up quickly, while others struggled with the unfamiliar rhythm. But even those who had difficulty could feel a difference in their stress levels. Now we're going to run the same exercise, Sarah announced. Same unexpected sounds, same distractions. But this time, implement the breathing technique from the moment you take your shooting position. The results were noticeably different. While the SEALs still reacted to the sudden noises, their recovery time was faster and their accuracy remained more consistent. Several of them looked surprised at their own performance. "That's actually pretty impressive," admitted Petty Officer Kim. "I could feel myself staying more focused even when the sound started." "The technique works because it gives your nervous system something to do other than panic," Sarah explained. "Instead of fighting your stress response, you're directing it toward maintaining optimal performance." Chief Morrison was nodding slowly. "This could be useful in a lot of situations. Not just shooting." "That's exactly right," Sarah confirmed. "These principles apply to any high-stress situation where you need to maintain peak performance. Decision-making, physical coordination, communication, they're all affected by stress, and they can all be improved through these techniques." As the first group continued their training, word was spreading among the other SEALs about what they were experiencing. The initial skepticism was being replaced by professional interest in techniques that demonstrably improved performance. At the second training station, Gunnery Sergeant Maria Vasquez was leading a group through tactical decision-making exercises. Vasquez had been working with Sarah for months, helping to translate psychological principles into military applications. Her combat experience gave her the credibility that Sarah knew she herself lacked with this audience. "Listen up," Vasquez called to her group. "What we're doing here is building on what Instructor Chen showed you. These aren't feel-good exercises. These are tools that can keep you alive and make you more effective operators." The station was set up as a series of decision trees, where participants had to make rapid choices based on incomplete information. But, unlike traditional decision-making training, Sarah's approach focused on managing the psychological factors that interfere with good judgment under stress. "The first thing you need to understand," Vasquez continued, "is that stress doesn't just affect your body. It affects your thinking. Under high stress, your brain defaults to familiar patterns, even when those patterns aren't appropriate for the current situation." She led the group through a series of scenarios where initial information suggested one type of response, but additional data revealed the need for completely different action. The psychological pressure came from time constraints and the consequences of wrong decisions. "Traditional training teaches you to gather information and make decisions," Vasquez explained. "What we're adding is training on how to recognize when your stress response is pushing you toward premature closure, making decisions before you have enough information because the uncertainty is uncomfortable." The exercises were designed to be frustrating. Just when participants thought they had enough information to act, new variables would be introduced that changed the entire situation. The goal was to build tolerance for uncertainty and improve judgment about when to act versus when to gather more information. Petty Officer Second Class Mike Chun, no relation to Sarah, found the exercises particularly challenging. "Gunny, this is harder than actual combat in some ways. At least in combat, you know who the enemy is." "That's the point," Vasquez replied. "These exercises are designed to be harder than most real situations you'll face. We're stress inoculating your decision-making process. When you're in a real situation with this training behind you, your brain will have already practiced dealing with uncertainty and complexity." At the third station, the focus was on team communication under stress. Sarah had observed that even the best teams could break down in their communication when stress levels rose. Team members would assume others had the same information they did, or would fail to clearly communicate critical updates because they were focused on their immediate tasks. The communication exercises involved teams of 4 SEALs working together to solve complex problems while dealing with simulated combat stress. Each team member had different pieces of information necessary for success, but they had to share and integrate that information while dealing with time pressure and distracting stimuli. "Communication isn't just about talking," explained the instructor running this station. "It's about ensuring that critical information actually gets transmitted and received. Under stress, we often think we've communicated clearly when we haven't, or we assume others understand things they don't. The exercises revealed patterns that even experienced teams fell into under pressure. Leaders would issue rapid-fire instructions without confirming understanding. Team members would fail to speak up when they had critical information because they assumed someone else already knew it. These were subtle breakdowns that could have major consequences in real operations. Back at Sarah's station, the first group was moving through increasingly complex scenarios. They had mastered the basic stress management techniques and were now applying them to situations that required both individual performance and team coordination. The final element we're going to work on today is what I call adaptive thinking, Sarah announced. This is the ability to change your approach when your initial plan isn't working without losing effectiveness or confidence. She set up a scenario that appeared to be a straightforward tactical problem with an obvious solution. However, every obvious solution had been designed to fail, forcing participants to step back and reconsider their assumptions about the situation. Most training teaches you to make a plan and execute it, Sarah explained. But real situations often require you to recognize when your plan isn't working and adapt quickly. The psychological challenge is that abandoning a plan can feel like failure, even when it's the smartest thing to do. Chief Morrison worked through the scenario, finding that each approach he tried was countered by unexpected complications. Rather than becoming frustrated, he began to implement the techniques Sarah had taught about managing uncertainty and staying open to new information. This is like fighting an opponent who changes the rules every time you start to win, he commented. Exactly, Sarah replied. And that's actually a pretty good description of modern warfare. The enemy doesn't follow your plan. The environment doesn't cooperate with your assumptions. Success comes from being able to adapt while maintaining your core capabilities. As the groups rotated through the different stations, the conversations among the SEALs began to change. Initial skepticism was being replaced by recognition that these techniques addressed real challenges they had faced in their careers. More importantly, the techniques were proving to work under the kind of stress conditions that closely mimicked real operations. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon as Sarah called all 301 SEALs back together for the final phase of the day's training. She could see the difference in their body language and expressions. These were professionals who had been shown new tools that could make them more effective, and they were taking those tools seriously. Gentlemen, Sarah began, you've spent the day learning techniques that go beyond traditional training methods. But learning the techniques is only the first step. The real value comes from integrating them into your existing skills and knowledge. She gestured toward the obstacle course where the day had begun. What you learned today isn't meant to replace anything you already know. It's meant to enhance everything you can already do. The question now is whether you're willing to put in the work to make these techniques automatic, the way your current skills are automatic. The response from the assembled SEALs was noticeably different from the morning's reserved skepticism. There were nods of understanding and agreement, along with the kind of focused attention that indicated genuine professional interest. Ma'am, called out Chief Morrison, what's the next step? How do we continue developing these skills? Sarah smiled, recognizing that the question indicated a successful transition from demonstration to acceptance. That's what we'll be covering tomorrow, Chief. Today was about showing you what's possible. Tomorrow, we start building these techniques into your regular training routine. As the SEALs began to disperse, small groups formed to count the third day of training dawned with unexpected urgency. Sarah arrived at the Coronado facility to find Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez waiting for her with a serious expression and a secure phone in his hand. Chun, we've got a situation, he said without preamble. There's been a development overseas that's going to cut our training timeline short. Instead of the planned 2-week program, we've got 3 more days to get these techniques combat ready. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The training program had been carefully designed as a gradual integration process, allowing SEALs to master each technique before moving to the next level of complexity. Compressing that timeline would require completely restructuring her approach. What kind of development, sir? She asked, though she suspected she wouldn't get a detailed answer. The kind that means some of our people might be putting your techniques to the test sooner than anyone planned, Rodriguez replied grimly. The question is, can you accelerate the program without losing effectiveness? Sarah looked out at the beach where the SEALs were already assembling for the day's training. 301 One elite operators who had shown genuine interest in learning new capabilities, but who would now need to master those capabilities under intense pressure. Sir, I can accelerate the program, but it's going to require some changes to our approach. Instead of gradual integration, we'll need to use high-intensity immersion training. It's riskier, but it can produce faster results. Rodriguez studied her for a moment. Riskier how? The psychological stress will be significantly higher, Sarah explained. We'll be pushing these operators to their limits in ways that could potentially backfire if not managed correctly. But, given the timeline constraints, it may be our only option. Do it, Rodriguez decided. These men have been through worse. And if there's a chance these techniques could give them an edge in whatever's coming, we need to take it. As the SEALs completed their morning physical training, Sarah made rapid adjustments to her lesson plans. The careful progression she had designed would be replaced by what she privately thought of as trial-by-fire training. Intensive scenarios that would force rapid skill acquisition under conditions that closely mimicked real combat stress. Gentlemen, Sarah announced as the SEALs gathered around her, today we're going to accelerate our timeline significantly. Instead of gradual skill building, you're going to be thrown into complex scenarios that will require you to integrate everything you learned yesterday while learning new techniques. Chief Morrison, who had become something of an unofficial liaison between Sarah and the other SEALs, raised his hand. Ma'am, is there a reason for the change in approach? Sarah exchanged a glance with Rodriguez before answering. Let's just say that the opportunity to put these skills to practical use may come sooner than originally anticipated. The implications of her statement weren't lost on the assembled warriors. These were men accustomed to rapid deployment and changing mission parameters. They understood that training timelines sometimes had to bow to operational realities. Roger that, ma'am, Chief Morrison replied. What do you need us to do? Sarah had restructured the day's training around what she called cascade learning, scenarios that would build in complexity while requiring participants to maintain previously learned skills under increasing stress. The first scenario was designed to test their ability to maintain the breathing techniques while performing complex physical tasks. You'll be working in teams of 6, Sarah explained, pointing toward a series of obstacles that had been set up overnight. Each team member will have a specific role, but you'll need to adapt those roles based on changing conditions. The catch is that you'll need to maintain your stress management techniques throughout, because the scenarios are designed to trigger your fight or flight response. The first team approached what appeared to be a standard assault course. But, as they began moving through it, hidden speakers activated with realistic battlefield audio, explosions, gunfire, shouting voices calling for medical assistance. The sounds were precisely calibrated to trigger the physiological responses associated with combat stress. Petty Officer Kim found himself in the lead position as his team navigated the course. The initial obstacles were manageable, but as the audio intensity increased, he could feel his heart rate spiking and his visual focus narrowing. This was exactly the kind of situation where Sarah's techniques were supposed to make a difference. Kim implemented the breathing technique he had learned, feeling his nervous system begin to stabilize even as the chaos continued around him. More importantly, he was able to maintain awareness of his teammates and the overall tactical situation rather than becoming fixated on the immediate obstacle in front of him. Contact rear, one of his teammates shouted, part of the scenarios designed to add another layer of stress. Kim's training would normally have him immediately pivot to address the threat, but Sarah's techniques had taught him to process the information before reacting. Instead of spinning around immediately, Kim used the peripheral awareness techniques to assess whether the threat was immediate or if his teammate was handling it. This allowed him to continue moving forward while staying informed about the team's overall situation. Exactly the kind of enhanced performance Sarah had promised. The team successfully completed the course, but, more importantly, they had done so while maintaining the psychological techniques under realistic stress conditions. As they finished, Kim realized that his decision-making had been noticeably clearer throughout the exercise. That was different, he commented to Chief Morrison as the next team prepared to run the course. I could feel myself staying more aware of everything, not just what was right in front of me. Yeah, Morrison agreed, and you kept making good calls even when things got chaotic. Normally, I would have expected at least one of us to get tunnel vision and miss something important. Sarah had been observing carefully, noting not just their performance, but their ability to maintain the techniques under pressure. What she was seeing exceeded her expectations. These operators were integrating the new skills faster than she had thought possible, largely because their existing discipline and training provided a solid foundation for the additions. The second scenario ramped up the complexity significantly. Teams were given mission objectives that required both individual skill and coordinated team action, but the objectives would change mid-mission based on new information. The psychological challenge was maintaining effectiveness while adapting to completely new requirements. Intelligence update came the announcement halfway through the second team's run. Primary objective has changed. You now have a medical evacuation scenario with multiple casualties and potential enemy contact. Sarah watched as the team processed this information. Traditional training would have taught them to quickly reorganize and adapt, but her techniques added an additional layer of capability. Instead of simply reacting to the new information, they used the decision-making protocols she had taught to assess whether the change was genuine or potentially compromised intelligence. The team leader, Staff Sergeant James Wright, implemented what Sarah called verification protocols before fully committing to the new mission parameters. Rather than assuming the intelligence update was accurate, he had his team continue their original mission while gathering information to confirm the new directive. This turned out to be the correct approach, as the scenario was designed to test whether teams would abandon successful approaches based on potentially false information. Wright's team maintained their original objective while preparing to adapt if the new intelligence proved genuine. Exactly the kind of flexible thinking Sarah had been teaching. Outstanding decision-making, Sarah commented as Wright's team completed the scenario. You managed to stay committed to your mission while remaining open to legitimate changes. That's a difficult balance to maintain under stress. Wright nodded, but his expression was thoughtful. Ma'am, I have to ask, are these scenarios based on real situations? Because that intelligence update scenario felt very specific. Sarah exchanged another glance with Rodriguez. Sergeant, let's just say that the scenarios are designed to be as realistic as possible. As the morning progressed, the scenarios became increasingly complex. Teams were required to integrate all the techniques they had learned while dealing with multiple simultaneous stressors: time pressure, incomplete information, competing objectives, and simulated combat conditions. The third scenario combined individual performance with team coordination in a way that tested every technique Sarah had taught. Teams had to navigate a complex environment while maintaining communication, making rapid decisions based on changing information, and preserving their individual capability under extreme stress. Petty Officer First Class Alex Rodriguez found himself separated from his team during this scenario, a situation that would typically trigger isolation anxiety and degraded decision-making. But the techniques Sarah had taught included specific protocols for maintaining effectiveness even when normal support systems weren't available. Rodriguez implemented what Sarah called solo operator protocols, methods for maintaining psychological stability and clear thinking when cut off from team support. Instead of becoming anxious about his isolation, he treated it as additional information to factor into his decision-making process. Using the techniques for managing uncertainty, Rodriguez was able to maintain his mission focus while working to re-establish contact with his team. When communication was restored, he had valuable intelligence to contribute rather than simply needing rescue or assistance. Rodriguez just demonstrated something really important, Sarah announced to the watching SEALs. When operators get separated or isolated, their effectiveness often degrades because they're dealing with psychological stress on top of tactical challenges. The techniques you're learning help maintain capability even when normal support systems aren't available. Chief Morrison was observing the scenarios with increasing appreciation for their sophistication. Ma'am, these aren't just training exercises, are they? These are like previews of specific types of situations. Chief, the goal is to prepare you for anything you might encounter, Sarah replied. That means training needs to be as close to reality as possible. The afternoon brought the most challenging scenarios yet. Sarah introduced what she called cascade failures, situations where multiple systems or plans failed simultaneously, requiring operators to adapt while maintaining effectiveness under extreme psychological pressure. The first cascade failure scenario began as a standard reconnaissance mission. Teams were given clear objectives and straightforward approaches. But, as they progressed, each element of their plan was systematically compromised. Equipment failed, intelligence proved inaccurate, communication was disrupted, and time constraints were compressed. Traditional training taught operators to adapt when individual elements failed, but cascade failures required a different approach entirely. Instead of trying to salvage failing plans, operators needed to recognize when complete reassessment was necessary and implement entirely new approaches under pressure. Team leader Chief Petty Officer Michael Santos found his team facing exactly this situation. Their original plan had been sound, but successive complications had made it not just difficult, but potentially counterproductive to continue. Santos implemented Sarah's protocols for recognizing when to abandon plans rather than persist with them. Team, we're implementing Protocol 7, Santos announced, using Sarah's terminology for complete mission reassessment. Instead of trying to force their original approach to work, the team stopped and rapidly developed an entirely new plan based on current conditions. The psychological challenge was significant. Military training emphasizes persistence and determination, but Sarah's techniques taught operators to distinguish between productive persistence and counterproductive stubbornness. Santos's team successfully made this distinction under pressure, developing an effective new approach within minutes. Santos just demonstrated advanced adaptive thinking, Sarah commented to the other observers. He recognized that continuing with a compromised plan would be less effective than starting fresh, and he made that decision quickly enough to maintain mission effectiveness. As the day continued, Sarah noticed something that exceeded even her optimistic projections. Not only were the SEALs mastering the individual techniques, but they were beginning to develop intuitive understanding of how to combine techniques for maximum effectiveness. Teams were spontaneously integrating stress management, decision-making protocols, and communication techniques in ways that created synergistic effects. Their performance under pressure wasn't just maintaining previous levels, it was actually improving as stress increased. This is remarkable, Rodriguez commented quietly to Sarah as they observed the afternoon scenarios. I've never seen operators actually get better as conditions got worse. That's exactly what these techniques are designed to achieve, Sarah replied. Instead of fighting stress, they're using it as fuel for enhanced performance. But, I have to admit, I didn't expect them to integrate the concepts this quickly. The final scenario of the day was designed to test everything the SEALs had learned under conditions that closely approximated real combat operations. Multiple teams were given interconnected missions that required both individual excellence and complex coordination. The scenario included all the stressors they had encountered throughout the training, but combined them in ways that created entirely new challenges. As Sarah watched the teams work through this final test, she felt a mixture of professional satisfaction and growing concern. The SEALs were demonstrating capabilities that exceeded her projections, but the accelerated timeline meant they were doing so with less practice than she would have preferred. Tomorrow would tell whether they could maintain these enhanced capabilities under even more realistic conditions. The day concluded with what Sarah had come to recognize as a different dawn broke with an unusual tension in the air at Coronado. Sarah arrived to find the training facility buzzing with activity that went beyond normal preparation. Additional personnel had arrived overnight, and she could see unfamiliar faces among the support staff. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez met her at the gate with an expression that confirmed her growing suspicions. "Chun, we need to talk privately before training begins," Rodriguez said, leading her toward the administrative building. There's been a development that changes everything. Inside the secure briefing room, Sarah found herself facing not just Rodriguez, but several officers she didn't recognize. The senior-most, a Navy captain with multiple deployment ribbons, gestured for her to take a seat. "Instructor Chun," the captain began, "I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell, Special Operations Command. What I'm about to tell you is classified, but your continued involvement in this training requires that you understand the full context." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized that her accelerated training program had taken on implications far beyond what she had originally envisioned. "The overseas situation I mentioned yesterday has escalated," Captain Mitchell continued. We have 301 SEALs who may be deploying within the next 72 hours to a situation where conventional tactics alone may not be sufficient. Your training techniques may be the difference between mission success and significant casualties. The weight of that statement settled over Sarah like a physical presence. What had begun as an innovative training program had suddenly become a crash course in capabilities that might save lives in real combat within days. Captain, I need to be honest about the limitations, Sarah said carefully. These techniques work, and they've been proven effective. But, ideally, operators would have weeks or months to fully integrate them. We've compressed that timeline dramatically, which increases both the potential benefits and the potential risks. Captain Mitchell nodded. Understood. But, given the nature of the situation they're likely to face, the risk of not having these enhanced capabilities may be greater than the risk of using techniques that aren't fully integrated. Rodriguez leaned forward. Chun, what would you need to give these operators the best possible preparation in the time we have? Sarah thought quickly, weighing the implications of what was being asked. I would need to completely restructure today's training around mission-specific scenarios. Instead of general skill building, we'd focus on the exact types of challenges they're most likely to encounter. Can you do that without knowing the specific mission details? Captain Mitchell asked. If you can give me the general parameters, environment, likely stressors, team sizes, mission duration, I can design training that addresses the psychological and performance challenges they'll face, Sarah replied. Captain Mitchell and Rodriguez exchanged glances before the captain spoke again. The mission involves urban environment, potential civilian presence, high uncertainty about enemy capabilities and intentions, and the possibility of rapid mission changes based on developing intelligence. Sarah felt her mind automatically shift into mission planning mode. That's actually helpful. Those parameters create specific psychological challenges that I can design training around. The uncertainty and civilian presence will create decision-making stress. The urban environment will require enhanced situational awareness. Rapid mission changes will test adaptive thinking capabilities. How long do you need to restructure the training? Rodriguez asked. Give me 2 hours to redesign the scenarios, and I can have a mission-specific program ready to implement, Sarah replied. As Sarah worked frantically to restructure the training program, the 301 SEALs were going through their standard pre-deployment preparations with an intensity that reflected the real-world implications of their situation. The atmosphere had shifted from training mode to operational mode overnight. Chief Morrison found himself thinking about the techniques he had learned over the past few days in a completely different context. What had seemed like interesting enhancements to existing capabilities now felt like potentially crucial tools for an actual mission. The pressure of that realization was both motivating and sobering. You feeling it too? Petty Officer Kim asked as he checked his equipment for the third time that morning. Yeah, Morrison replied. Makes you think differently about those breathing techniques when you know you might need them for real in a couple days. 2 hours later, Sarah stood before the assembled SEALs with a completely restructured training program. The scenarios she had designed were no longer general skill-building exercises, but specific rehearsals for the types of situations they were likely to encounter. Gentlemen, Sarah began, her voice carrying a different weight than it had in previous sessions. Today's training is designed around mission-specific scenarios. You'll be working in your actual deployment teams, and the challenges you'll face are based on current intelligence assessments of what you're likely to encounter in theater. The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. These weren't training exercises anymore. They were mission rehearsals. The first scenario placed teams in a simulated urban environment with civilians, unclear threats, and rapidly changing objectives. The psychological stressors were designed to mirror exactly what intelligence suggested they would face: uncertainty about who was hostile, pressure to avoid civilian casualties, and the need to adapt quickly to new information. Team Alpha found themselves in the middle of this complex scenario within minutes. Their objective was to secure a building and extract a high-value target, but the scenario was designed so that initial intelligence proved incomplete and potentially compromised. Staff Sergeant James Wright, leading Team Alpha, implemented the verification protocols Sarah had taught as soon as they received their initial mission briefing. Rather than accepting the intelligence at face value, His team approached the scenario with the enhanced situational awareness techniques designed to identify discrepancies between expected and actual conditions. "Something's not right about this setup," Wright announced to his team as they observed their target building. Instead of immediately implementing their planned approach, he used Sarah's protocols for dealing with uncertainty to gather additional information. This decision proved crucial when the scenario revealed that their original intelligence was deliberately false, designed to test whether teams would recognize and adapt to compromised information. Wright's team avoided the trap that would have led them into a dangerous situation, exactly the kind of enhanced decision-making Sarah's techniques were designed to produce. "Outstanding application of verification protocols," Sarah commented to the observers. Wright just demonstrated how enhanced situational awareness can prevent mission failure when standard intelligence proves unreliable. The second scenario increased the complexity by introducing multiple simultaneous objectives with civilian complications. Teams had to balance mission requirements with civilian safety while maintaining effectiveness under extreme time pressure. Chief Morrison's team faced a situation where their primary objective was complicated by the presence of non-combatants who might be hostages, human shields, or simply civilians caught in the wrong place. Traditional training provided guidelines for such situations, but Sarah's techniques added crucial capabilities for managing the psychological stress of making life and death decisions about people's status and intentions. Morrison implemented what Sarah called stress compartmentalization, the ability to maintain operational effectiveness while dealing with emotionally charged situations. Instead of becoming paralyzed by the moral complexity of the scenario, Morrison's team used Sarah's decision-making protocols to systematically assess the situation and identify the approach most likely to achieve mission success while minimizing civilian casualties. The team's performance exceeded expectations. They successfully completed their primary objective while protecting all civilians in the area, something that required both tactical skill and the enhanced stress management capabilities Sarah had taught. "This is exactly what these techniques are designed for," Sarah explained to Captain Mitchell, who was observing the scenarios intently. "Situations where operators need to maintain peak performance while dealing with moral complexity and emotional stress." The third scenario of the day introduced what Sarah considered the ultimate test of the integrated techniques: cascade failures in a hostile environment with civilian presence. Teams would face multiple simultaneous problems while needing to maintain both mission effectiveness and ethical standards. Petty Officer First Class David Kim's team found themselves dealing with equipment failures, compromised communications, inaccurate intelligence, and a rapidly evolving threat environment. Traditional training would prepare them to handle each problem individually, but Sarah's techniques were designed for exactly these kinds of overwhelming situations. Kim implemented what Sarah called priority triage, the ability to rapidly assess which problems needed immediate attention and which could be managed or worked around. Instead of trying to solve every problem, Kim's team used Sarah's frameworks to identify which issues were mission-critical and which were manageable complications. The result was a level of performance that impressed even the experienced observers. Kim's team maintained mission effectiveness despite significant challenges, completing their objective while adapting to constantly changing conditions. More importantly, they did so while preserving team cohesion and individual capability. "Kim just demonstrated advanced adaptive leadership," Captain Mitchell observed. His team didn't just survive the cascade failures. They actually maintained offensive capability throughout. As the day progressed, Sarah noticed that the SEALs were not just applying the techniques she had taught, but were beginning to innovate and adapt them to specific situations. The integration had reached a level where they could modify and combine techniques based on real-time assessment of their effectiveness. This was beyond what Sarah had hoped to achieve even in her original extended timeline. The combination of exceptional students and mission urgency had created a learning environment that produced extraordinary results. The afternoon brought the most realistic scenarios yet. Teams were given actual mission profiles based on current intelligence, with the only fictional elements being the specific location and timing. The psychological stressors, tactical challenges, and decision-making requirements were drawn directly from current operational planning. Team Bravo faced a scenario that perfectly captured the complexity they might encounter within days. Multiple objectives, uncertain enemy capabilities, civilian considerations, and the possibility that their mission parameters could change based on developing intelligence. The scenario was designed to test every technique Sarah had taught under conditions that closely approximated real combat operations. Chief Petty Officer Michael Santos led Team Bravo through this ultimate test with a level of performance that exceeded even Sarah's optimistic projections. The team maintained their enhanced capabilities throughout the scenario, adapting to changing conditions while preserving both mission effectiveness and ethical standards. Santos just demonstrated something remarkable, Sarah explained to the assembled observers. His team not only maintained their enhanced capabilities under extreme stress, but actually improved their performance as conditions became more challenging. They're using stress as fuel for better performance rather than just managing it. As the day's training concluded, Sarah realized that the 301 SEALs had achieved something unprecedented. In just 3 days of intensive training, they had not only learned advanced performance techniques, but had integrated them to the point where they could use them effectively under realistic combat conditions. The final debrief session had a different tone from previous days. These weren't discussions about interesting training concepts. They were operational planning sessions where enhanced capabilities were being factored into actual mission planning. "Ma'am," Chief Morrison asked during the debrief, "are these techniques something we should brief to command as part of our enhanced capabilities?" Sarah looked at Captain Mitchell before answering. "Chief, that's above my pay grade. But I will say that what you've demonstrated today goes beyond standard SEAL capabilities. How you use that advantage is a tactical decision." As the SEALs dispersed for what might be their final night before 6 weeks after the accelerated training program concluded, Sarah sat in the secure briefing room at Coronado, staring at after-action reports that exceeded her most optimistic projections. The 301 SEALs had returned from their deployment, and the results of their first real-world application of her techniques were spread across the conference table in classified documents. Captain Mitchell entered the room carrying additional files, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with something approaching amazement. "Chun, I've been reading these reports for 3 days straight, and I still can't quite believe what I'm seeing." Sarah looked up from the mission summaries she had been studying. "Captain, I have to admit, some of these results go beyond what the techniques should theoretically produce. Are we sure about the accuracy of these assessments?" "Triple-checked," Captain Mitchell replied, taking a seat across from Sarah. "And that's not even the most remarkable part. What's remarkable is that the enhanced capabilities didn't just hold up under real combat conditions. They actually improved as stress levels increased. The deployment had lasted 5 weeks and involved operations across 3 different theaters. The missions ranged from direct action raids to complex urban operations with significant civilian presence. In every case, the SEALs had demonstrated performance levels that exceeded historical norms for similar operations. "Let's start with the numbers," Captain Mitchell said, opening the first file. "Mission success rate, 97%, compared to the historical average of 83% for similar operations. Civilian casualties, 0, in operations where we would typically expect some civilian harm despite best efforts. Friendly casualties, minimal, with faster recovery times than predicted." Sarah studied the data, looking for patterns that might explain the extraordinary results. "What about the stress indicators? How did the operators perform psychologically during extended operations?" "That's where it gets really interesting," Captain Mitchell replied, pulling out a thick psychological assessment report. Instead of the typical degradation in performance over extended operations, these operators actually showed improved decision-making and stress management as missions progressed. The psychological data was unprecedented. Traditional military operations showed predictable patterns of stress accumulation and performance degradation over time. These operators had demonstrated the opposite, enhanced capabilities that strengthened under pressure. "Captain, I need to understand something," Sarah said, setting down the reports. "Were the operations themselves different from typical missions, or did the techniques actually enable this level of performance?" Captain Mitchell smiled. "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you. Because we're not just looking at improved performance. We're looking at entirely new capabilities. She opened another file containing detailed mission narratives. Operation Thunder Bay, urban environment, high civilian presence, intelligence that proved to be 40% inaccurate. Chief Morrison's team not only completed their primary objective, but identified and neutralized threats that weren't in their original briefing. They used your verification protocols to recognize the intelligence gaps and your adaptive thinking techniques to develop real-time solutions. Sarah read through Morrison's mission report, noting the specific applications of techniques she had taught. But, more importantly, she could see evidence of innovation, ways the SEALs had adapted and combined techniques to meet challenges that hadn't been covered in training. What Morrison did here is remarkable, Sarah observed. He used the uncertainty protocols not just to recognize bad intelligence, but to actively gather better intelligence while maintaining mission momentum. That's a level of integration that should have taken months to develop. It gets better, Captain Mitchell said, opening another file. Operation Silent Storm. Petty Officer Kim's team faced a cascade failure scenario almost identical to what you trained them for. Equipment failures, communication breakdowns, and changing mission parameters all within a 6-hour window. Kim's report detailed a situation where multiple systems failed simultaneously while his team was conducting a hostage rescue operation in hostile territory. Instead of aborting or struggling through with degraded capabilities, Kim's team had used Sarah's techniques to actually improve their effectiveness as conditions worsened. Kim implemented what he called stress acceleration, Captain Mitchell explained. Instead of managing the stress from multiple failures, his team used it to enhance their focus and decision-making. They completed the mission ahead of schedule with better results than originally planned. Sarah shook her head in amazement. Stress acceleration wasn't something I specifically taught. Kim developed that application himself based on the underlying principles. That's what's been happening across all the teams, Captain Mitchell confirmed. They've taken your techniques and evolved them based on real-world applications. They're not just using what you taught them, they're innovating based on it. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez entered, followed by several of the SEALs who had participated in the training and deployment. Chief Morrison, Petty Officer Kim, and Staff Sergeant Wright looked different somehow, more confident, more composed than even their usual elite bearing suggested. "Ma'am," Chief Morrison said, addressing Sarah, "we wanted to thank you personally for what those techniques did for us out there." Sarah gestured for them to take seats around the conference table. "Chief, I should be thanking you. You took experimental techniques and proved they work under conditions I couldn't fully simulate in training." "It was more than that, ma'am," Petty Officer Kim interjected. "Those techniques didn't just work. They kept getting better the harder things got. By the end of our deployment, we were performing at levels we didn't know were possible." Staff Sergeant Wright leaned forward. "Ma'am, I need to tell you about something that happened during Operation Arctic Wind. We were in a situation where everything went wrong simultaneously. Enemy force was larger than expected, civilian presence was triple what intelligence indicated, and our extraction timeline got compressed by 60%. Sarah listened as Wright described a scenario that should have resulted in mission failure or significant casualties. Instead, his team had not only completed their objectives but had done so while protecting all civilians and identifying additional intelligence targets. "The remarkable thing," Wright continued, "was that as the situation got worse, our performance got better. We started using stress as information, uncertainty as tactical advantage, and complexity as opportunity for creative solutions. It was like everything you taught us crystallized under maximum pressure." Captain Mitchell spread out additional reports on the table. What Wright is describing happened across multiple teams and operations. We're not just looking at improved performance. We're seeing the emergence of entirely new operational capabilities. Sarah studied the assembled reports, noting patterns that went beyond individual technique application. The SEALs had developed what appeared to be collective enhanced capabilities, where teams performed at levels that exceeded the sum of their individual skills. "Gentlemen, can you describe how the team dynamics changed during operations?" Sarah asked. Chief Morrison answered first. "Ma'am, it was like we developed a kind of shared awareness. Individual stress management techniques combined into team-level stress optimization. When one team member encountered something challenging, the whole team's performance improved rather than degraded. We started calling it stress synchronization, Kim added. Instead of individual team members managing their own stress, we learned to use collective stress as fuel for enhanced team performance. It happened naturally, without specific training for it. Sarah realized she was witnessing the emergence of capabilities that went beyond her original theoretical framework. The techniques had combined and evolved under real-world conditions to produce results that exceeded their design parameters. "Captain," Sarah said, turning to Captain Mitchell, "what are the implications for future training and operations?" "That's what we need to discuss," Captain Mitchell replied. "Because what you've created here isn't just an enhanced training program. It's a new operational paradigm. These capabilities need to be understood, standardized, and integrated into broader special operations training." Wright raised his hand. "Ma'am, if I may, there's another aspect to this. The techniques didn't just improve our performance on these specific missions. They've changed how we approach every aspect of military operations. Problem-solving, leadership, communication, everything is enhanced." Sarah looked around the table at the faces of these elite operators who had taken her experimental techniques and proven them under the most demanding conditions possible. More than that, they had evolved those techniques into capabilities she hadn't imagined. "What you're describing," Sarah said slowly, "suggests that these techniques tap into human performance potential that we're only beginning to understand. The fact that they improved under stress rather than degraded indicates that we may have fundamentally misunderstood how human capability works under extreme conditions." Captain Mitchell nodded. "Which brings us to the next question. What's the next step? How do we take what these operators have proven and make it available to broader special operations forces?" Chief Morrison leaned forward. "Ma'am, if I may suggest, the next step should be having us help train others. We've taken your theoretical framework and proved it in the real world. Now we can teach both the original techniques and the innovations we developed in the field." Sarah felt a mixture of professional satisfaction and humbling recognition. What had begun as her attempt to enhance existing SEAL capabilities had evolved into something far beyond her original vision. These operators had taken her work and transformed it into capabilities that redefined what was possible. "Gentlemen," Sarah said, "I think that's exactly what we should do. But, with one modification, this time, we designed the training around the evolved techniques you've developed in the field. We combined the theoretical framework with proven real-world applications." The meeting continued for another 2 hours as they outlined plans for an expanded training program that would incorporate both Sarah's original techniques and the innovations the SEALs had developed during deployment. But, more than just planning future training, they were documenting the emergence of enhanced human performance capabilities that had implications far beyond military applications. As the meeting concluded and the SEALs departed, Sarah remained behind with Captain Mitchell to review the full scope of what had been accomplished. "Chun," Captain Mitchell said, "I want you to understand what you've achieved here. You didn't just improve existing capabilities, you helped discover new ones. These operators are performing at levels that redefine what we thought was possible." Sarah looked out the window at Coronado Beach, where new groups of operators were conducting traditional training exercises. "Captain, I think what we've really discovered is that human potential under stress is far greater than we've traditionally believed. These operators didn't gain new abilities. They learned to access abilities they already had." "Whatever the explanation," Captain Mitchell replied, "the results speak for themselves. And, more importantly, they're reproducible. We now have a path to consistently developing these enhanced capabilities." As Sarah packed up the mission reports and assessment data, she reflected on the journey from that first skeptical morning when 301 SEALs had questioned whether she could teach them anything useful. The answer had proven to be yes, but in ways that none of them had anticipated. The techniques had worked not just as designed but far beyond their design parameters. More importantly, they had proven that human performance under extreme stress could be enhanced rather than simply maintained. The implications stretched far beyond military operations to any field where people needed to perform at their peak under challenging conditions. As she left Coronado that evening, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that what had begun as an experimental training program had evolved into proof that human potential was far greater than anyone had previously imagined. The 301 SEALs had not only learned her techniques, they had proven that those techniques could unlock capabilities that redefined what was possible when skill met science under the pressure of real-world conditions. The small woman who had once seemed out of place among elite warriors had helped those warriors discover that they were capable of even more than their already extraordinary standards suggested. And, in doing so, she had opened doors to human performance possibilities that were only beginning to be explored. Deployment. Sarah reflected on what had been accomplished. 3 days earlier, she had faced skepticism from elite operators who questioned whether she could teach them anything useful. Now, those same operators were demonstrating capabilities that exceeded her most optimistic projections. The real test, however, would come not in training scenarios, but in actual operations where the enhanced capabilities might mean the difference between mission success and failure, between lives saved and lives lost. Captain Mitchell approached Sarah as the training facility emptied. "Chun, I want you to know that what you've accomplished here is extraordinary. These operators now have capabilities that could give them a significant advantage in what they're about to face." "Captain, I hope the advantages are never needed," Sarah replied. "But if they are, these men are ready." As darkness fell over Coronado, Sarah knew that her innovative training program was about to face its ultimate test in the real world, where the techniques she had taught would either prove their worth or reveal their limitations under the most demanding conditions possible. NT kind of discussion among the SEALs. Instead of talking about the techniques as interesting additions to their skill set, they were discussing them as integral parts of their operational capability. The transition from learning new concepts to integrating enhanced performance had happened faster than she had thought possible. Chief Morrison approached Sarah as the teams completed their final debriefs. "Ma'am, I have to ask, what's the plan for tomorrow? Because after today, I feel like we're ready for just about anything." Sarah looked at the chief, recognizing both the confidence and the underlying question in his statement. "Tomorrow, Chief, we find out if that feeling is justified." As the sun set over Coronado Beach, Sarah reflected on the day's unprecedented success. The SEALs had not only learned advanced performance techniques, but had begun demonstrating capabilities that went beyond the sum of their individual skills. Tomorrow would bring the ultimate test of whether those capabilities would hold up under the most realistic conditions possible, conditions that might prove to be more realistic than any of them anticipated. In discussions about what they had experienced, Sarah could hear conversations about applications to specific missions and situations, which told her that the techniques were being processed not as abstract concepts, but as practical tools. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez approached as Sarah packed up her equipment. "Chun, I have to say, this went better than I expected. These guys don't usually take to new methods this quickly." "It's because the techniques work," Sarah replied. "And, more importantly, they work for reasons that make sense to people with real operational experience. These aren't feel-good theories. They're practical applications of how human performance actually functions under stress." As the sun continued its descent, Sarah reflected on the day's progress. The morning's demonstration had overcome initial skepticism, but the afternoon's hands-on training had accomplished something more valuable. It had convinced these elite warriors that they could become even more effective than they already were. The real test, however, would come tomorrow when they began the process of making these new techniques automatic enough to use in real situations. Today had been about possibilities. Tomorrow would be about building new capabilities that could save lives and complete missions. "I have to admit, I wasn't sure what to expect today. But those techniques you demonstrated, they're not just theory, are they? You've tested them under real stress conditions." Sarah nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Chief, everything you saw today has been validated through extensive testing. But, more than that, these principles are based on how elite performers in other fields manage stress and make decisions under pressure. We're applying lessons learned from emergency room doctors, airline pilots, and championship athletes." The morning demonstration was only the beginning. Sarah knew that showing the techniques was one thing, but having these elite operators accept and adopt them would be an entirely different challenge. She had prepared for questions, skepticism, and resistance. What she hadn't fully prepared for was the level of professional curiosity her demonstration had generated. As the SEALs began forming smaller groups to discuss what they had observed, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The first hurdle had been cleared, but the real test was yet to come. These men would need to try the techniques themselves, experience their effectiveness firsthand, and integrate them with their existing skills and knowledge. The sun continued its climb toward noon as Sarah prepared for the next phase of the training. In just a few minutes, she would go from demonstrating techniques to teaching them to 300, and one of the most demanding students she had ever faced.